Well, developing story this afternoon, the defence in Thandi Modise's animal cruelty case is suggesting that there's a political motive behind the charges. Her advocate Dali Mpofu says they intend to argue that this is the motive during closing arguments. The National Assembly Speaker is facing 6 counts of animal cruelty dating back to 2014, where animals on her farm were found cannibalizing dead carcasses. She's pleaded not guilty. Our reporter Zintle Kanyane is in court for us. She joins us now. Zintle, good afternoon to you. What arguments have we heard in court so far today?
Well, Stephen, the prosecution called for 3 witnesses today. The prosecution being AfriForum. They called for Justin Vetovich, which he was at that time a reporter for Port Herald. It's a local newspaper here, and he's now the editor of that newspaper. Now, he was called to the stand to give his account of his eyewitness during that inspection done by NSPCA. He says that he was off on that weekend and he got a call from the then editor telling him that he needs to go towards the farm and he's there going to meet a DA councillor that will give him more information. He was made aware that that farm belonged to Thandi Modise, and he says when he got there, he then just took out his camera and he started taking pictures. And it is during that argument or during that testimony of evidence that we saw Advocate Dali Mpofu then bringing in that notion that perhaps he was off on the first place, and the fact that the information or the tip-off came from a DA councillor here, knowing that at that time Thandi Modise was the premier and an ANC member, that might have been a political motive. But also on the side of journalism as well, we saw Justin not really practicing that to its full extent, to the fact that he says when he got to the farm, all he did was to just take pictures of these dead carcasses and go back to the office and write a story. And we would know you have to try and get as many sides of the story as possible. And so that's what Dali Mpofu posed to him, that why did he not go to the farmhouse? Why did you not try and speak to the farm manager to get another side of the story, except for the tip-off that you got from a DA councillor? After Justin's testimony, we saw Dr. Samir Abdul Abbas coming to the stand. He's a veterinarian that was at the scene a few days after. Remember, the inspection had happened on the 4th of July in 2014. The veterinarian got to the farm on the 6th of July. And that's when he took one of the carcasses that was slaughtered and he performed a post-mortem. And in his capacity as an expert, that's where the prosecution wanted to get more information as to how these pigs had died. Was it malnutrition? Was it starvation? And just when this witness was about to give that evidence, Advocate Dali Mpofu rose with an objection saying that as the defense, they were not told that this witness is going to come and present evidence in his capacity as an expert. If that was the case, the prosecution was supposed to give them that information prior so that they could verify this witness's evidence with their independent expert themselves that would either agree with the witness's evidence or not. And so there was a lot of back and forth around that. It was interesting to see such senior legal counsels jump up and down and objecting every 5 or less, every minute or so. Just on that on that particular evidence, the court ruled that this particular witness, this expert, should step down to give the defense more time to prepare for that expert evidence. After that, we saw the last testimonial witness that came to the stand. He is a local feed producer here, and he had taken an order from Thandi Modise's farm to produce feed for those animals. And he says, as per his duties as a provider, after delivering feed to a farm, he would personally go to that farm to see if the feed was delivered in the right capacity and in the right condition. Now, he says when he arrived at the farm, he didn't only check on the feed that was ordered, which he said it would have taken just 2 weeks to feed the pigs that were there with the feed. But he says out of his love for animals, he wanted to then go and see these animals. And that was in November in 2013. And he says already when he went to see the pigs and the animals, he said they were already feeding on a dead carcass already. So he gave an impression that the animals were already in bad shape. But as a counter-argument, Dali Mpofu then said, 8 months down the line, we see the inspectors of the NSPCA coming to inspect the farm, and they found 85 pigs that were still alive at that point. And he then alluded to the fact that they should have been fed something from November last year to July for them to still be alive. And he is not the only feed provider in the area, so perhaps the farm manager, Mr. Dr. Chauke, of Thandi Modise's farm, perhaps may have gotten another manufacturer to feed the animals in the 8 months. And so he kind of disputed the fact or the image that this witness was posting, to say that the deteriorating state of these animals started way before the actual inspection that resulted on this case that we're seeing today. So we could really see Dali Mpofu really trying to poke holes in the evidence of each and every witness that took to the stand today. And he boldly said that if this farm did not belong to Thandi Modise, who was then the premier, why would this particular feed supplier want to go and see the animals? The judge himself, Modise, asked this question to the witness that, do you go and see each and every animal or cattle of every farmer that you produce, you know? He kind of really posed that question of why the only reason why you went to see these pigs is because you knew who they belonged to, almost eluding that element of political conspiracy once again. The case has been adjourned, Stephen. After the third witness, it has been adjourned for next year in April, the 22nd to the 23rd of April next year. And we spoke briefly to Thandi Modise herself just after court to find out what is her take to the proceedings and the way things are going. And she said she can't wait for her day in court. She can't wait for her moment to take to the stand, to tell her side of the story. And she says she's been tortured for 6 years already. It's about time that she takes to the stand and she tells her version of events.
It's going to be fascinating to watch her on the stand. I mean, she is someone who is very, very experienced in all sorts of ways, played important roles in our society. But at the same time, I can imagine, Harry Nell for the prosecution being cross-examined by him. We've seen what that can be like in the past. And I'm sure he will say, look, there might well be a political motive. His client is AFRI for him. But I'm sure he will argue a crime is a crime. It doesn't matter why you're being prosecuted if the crime is a crime. It's going to be a fascinating moment next year.
Definitely. It's definitely a case worth following very closely, because there's also an element of oversight, Stephen, in as much as she had been busy, especially after the local government elections in 2014. She moved to Parliament as the NCOP Speaker. So she can say that I was not around. I put a farm manager in place, I put employees, I made sure the feed was available. I was under the impression that everything was well and good. But then there's an element, that responsibility of oversight, that even though you are away, even though you've put other people to take care of your livestock, especially farming, which is such a demanding industry that needs so much attention from an owner, you have the responsibility to play oversight. You have a responsibility to ensure that such cruelty and starvation that we've heard coming from the prosecution does not happen to your livestock. So it will be interesting to hear her defense in that. It will be interesting to hear how things unfolded in her version of events. And you know how Kharenel can be very technical, very attentive to each and every answer you give. Really, it's going to be quite a grilling process. But at the same time, I mean, you look at the defense, she's got Dali Mpofu on her side, and we know the style of Dali Mpofu. When cross-examining, it's going to be a very, very heated court session. But, you know, from the glimpse that I had in court with these two giants going head-to-head, I think it's going to be a very long court proceedings with them objecting every single 5 seconds, which is what we saw today, just making sure that they protect their witness as much as possible and that not the wrong impression goes across to the court.
Zinhle Kanyane, thanks very much indeed for that report. I do appreciate it. All right.